Welcome everyone. In this video, we're going to be taking our first measurements with our multimeter on the TP-Link router's board. However, before we get started with those measurements, I just really want to quickly show you something important and another very important tool, and that is our notebook. So in this course, I'm going to be taking notes in a paper notebook, and this is what I usually do when I'm working on electronics because I may not always have my computer handy. And sometimes I find it very useful to just have a paper notebook because you can also draw circuits or other just quick memos in it. Now, I apologize for my very bad handwriting, but I want to just quickly show you what I have started with writing for notes for so far what we're testing with this TP-Link router. All right, so I've put the target here and I've got the router model number and the name of the manufacturer here. So we have this TP-Link TLWR841N. And then also very importantly, I have the serial number here. And this is important because if we're testing multiple routers or multiple targets of the same one, then we need to identify what the actual one that we are testing on in case we do any damage to it or something happens, we can actually trace back with our testing and see which model and which actual serial number to trace back to that physical piece of equipment. Also included dates, so I'll be adding these dates in as well so we know when we're doing certain things. And I have the first action wrote down here. So the first thing that we've done is open up the router case with the spudger and visually inspected the PCB. And now as we do more testing, I'm going to be adding these actions and taking notes in here. So feel free to take notes however you would like. If you prefer to take it, in OneNote or Cherry Tree or some other type of digital note-taking app, then go ahead. That's totally acceptable. My preference is just to take these paper notes when I'm doing the measurements. All right, so we'll be coming back to this throughout the course, and then we'll also be visiting these notes when we write up our final report. I'm just going to put this out of the way and then grab the things that we're going to need for taking our first voltage measurements. Okay, so to take our measurements, we are going to need, of course, the router with it opened up because we're going to actually need to be probing internally on the board. We're going to need the router plugged in for this, so we will need the power supply, and then we're also going to, of course, need our multimeter. A quick reminder on safety that we're just going to be plugging in the power supply when we need to, and then we'll unplug it when we don't need it. Just to quickly show you where we're going to be measuring, a lot of times on these boards, if we're measuring the through-hole components, which is what we're going to be starting with, it's actually easier to probe them on the bottom. So I'm just going to flip this over. It just lifts out like this, and then we can flip it over. And if we look at the back, we can see, again, like we identified before, these through-hole components, and that's where we're going to be doing the testing. Now, I'm going to be using what's called a third hand to hold this up, and it's just a little bit easier to film. You don't need to use one if you don't have one. You can just rest it on the router case like this and do the probing as well. So I'm just going to quickly set up that third hand and then we'll jump over to testing. I've got everything set up now, and just to show you before we plug it in, the first measurement we're going to be taking is to verify the input voltage, and this is something that is always good to test before we do any further testing. Now on the router here, we know we have this input jack right here, so right here, and this is where the power supply plugs in, and then it is a through-hole component, and these are the two pins that come through and are soldered, so we can test the voltage by measuring the drop across these two pins. And on this router, I already know this is the positive one and this is the negative one, so we'll put the red lead here and then the black lead here, and that's how we can test, and I'll show you how we can figure that out. All right, so I'm going to get the meter set up first. All right, so since we know that we are at looking around 9 volts, I'm going to set it to this 20 volts DC setting that I have here, and we can use that for measurement. And I think now that we know where we're probing and we have our meter set up, we can plug it in. Okay, so just a little bit out of the shot here, but I can see the lights are starting to light up. Perfect. So I know that we have the power on and we're ready to take our measurement. Move this here so it's just a little bit more visible. And red lead goes to the top one and black lead goes to the bottom one. And we just press it there. All right, and we see it stabilized there at around 9.25, 9.26 volts. All right, so if we had them backwards and we just want to identify what it would look like if it's backwards, If I do put the positive or the red one on the wrong lead, then we'll see that we actually get a negative measurement. So that's how we can tell which one is the positive and which one is the negative. And that's important because on this circuit, all of our return current is going through this negative end, and we can think of that as being the ground. So we'll come back to that later. So to take these voltage measurements, what we did there is we actually connected the digital multimeter in parallel to make these measurements. And just to make that a little bit more easier to read, I'm going to move this third hand out of the way, and I'll show a quick drawing of the circuit. All right, so I've got a drawing here just to quickly illustrate how we're taking that measurement. Now I've got right here a bad drawing of that input jack. We've got the positive and negative leads of it, and then it flows through and into the rest of the circuit. Now what this is called, or how I'm representing this, is a black box equivalent. So we don't care necessarily about what's in that circuit at all. I'm just showing that, the power or the current flows through out of this jack, and then it goes through to that whole rest of the circuit, which we don't care about. Now, in order for us to take the voltage measurement in parallel, what we did is we attached the probes to, if we can think of it, this way, these ends, and took that measurement. And now if I just set these down to kind of illustrate, what we've done when we do that test is the power is able to split. That's why it's in parallel. So our current comes out of the positive end, and it can split at this node, of course, and go through our meter, and then also most, or if not almost all, of the current goes through the router circuit. And that's how we take that measurement in parallel for measuring voltage. When we are measuring voltage with the multimeter, it has what is called a very, very high input resistance. So the resistance internally that's making this measurement is very, very high. And what that does is that it allows us to not affect the rest of the circuit while we're taking that measurement, because we barely take any current to measure that voltage. For voltages, which is what we're going to be probably measuring the most on circuits, it's very easy to do. All we need to do is just find the two leads of the component we want to measure the voltage drop over, and we just touch the red to the positive and the black to the negative, and we'll get our voltage reading. I'm going to take this drawing away and put the router board back on the third hand, and I'll give you a quick challenge to take a measurement on your own. Okay, so at the very top of this board, beside this orange flashing LED, there is a green one that is on constantly, and if you just power it on your board, it does take a few seconds for it to come on constant like that. But what my challenge is, or what you can pause this video now and do, is try to take a voltage measurement of this and make sure you get it to be a positive reading. Just a hint that, of course, the leads that come through, this is a through hole component. So the leads are in the back. You can measure it on the back, or if you want, you can actually measure it on the front. So pause the video here and find out what the voltage drop over that LED is. All right, did you get it? Let's take a quick measurement and see what I get for the reading of that voltage. Again, I've got mine set still on this 20 volts, which is going to be okay for reading this measurement. And I'm just going to touch the two leads here. All right, and I am getting mine at 1.94 volts, which seems about right for this green LED. Again, if you flip these and put it the other way, then you're going to see the same reading or similar reading, but negative. There are a few other areas on this board where you can measure voltages. One of them, a good one to check, is the capacitor. So I'm going to stop this video here, but if you want to practice a little bit more, then I think it's a good idea to go through and check some of the voltages across other components. You can start with the capacitor, which the leads are right here. That wraps up this video, and I will see you in the next one.